Good morning. Welcome to day 2 of our New Horizons in Journalism Conference. Thank you for being here. We had a great first day. Today is only half a day, so it'll be much easier. I'm David McDonald, the Executive Director of the World Press Institute. Once again, we want to thank the America for Bulgaria Foundation and the Association of European Journalists in Bulgaria for all the help with this conference. We have 2 panels today. The first one is on disinformation and politicizing the pandemic with Michael Montgomery moderating. And the second panel is charting the future of independent media in Bulgaria. Finally, for you Bulgarian speakers, we're going to have a panel in Bulgarian. And so for the English speakers, you'll need to have a headphone to listen to the English translation. First panel, of course, will be in English. But anyway, welcome, and I'm going to turn this over to Michael Montgomery.
Thanks, David. Good morning, dobro utro for everyone. We are going to talk about disinformation and politicizing the pandemic. I'm just going to say a few words and then introduce our panel and look forward to getting some questions from you all. Alongside the COVID-19 pandemic, there's been what the World Health Organization calls an infodemic, an overabundance of information, some accurate, some not. And in our digital age, infodemics spread like wildfire. They create a breeding ground for uncertainty. Uncertainty, in turn, fuels skepticism and distrust. It's commonly assumed that misinformation is largely a phenomenon of social media, but, and I think we're going to hear about this, it also appears in traditional media. Traditional media outlets have reported and sometimes amplified the voices of players across the political spectrum. In America, there was a study by a team at Cornell University that found that the media mentions of President Donald Trump made up by far the largest share of the infodemic, nearly 40%, coming from the media. And in addition to all this, there has been concerted efforts by various governments to suppress or even falsely, falsify information about the pandemic with lethal results. So that's what we're going to talk about. We're going to hear from some interesting places where a lot of this has been quite a stark situation. So let me introduce our panel first. To my left, Boryana Dzhambazova, sorry. Boryana Dzhambazova is a journalist and board member of the Association of European Journalists in Bulgaria. Boryana's work has appeared in the New York Times, The Economist, and Politico Europe, among other publications. To her left, Joanna Krawczyk is head of partnerships at Gazeta, Wyborcza. And to her left is Anna Babinets. We heard both of you on panels yesterday, editor-in-chief of co-founder of Slidstvo.Info, an independent investigative journalism agency. All right, so I want to start with you, Boryana, in talking about Bulgaria. I want to go back, actually, to each of you to the first months of the pandemic. And when did you start seeing indications of something kind of weird, like weird information, misinformation that was getting out to the public, that was really having some kind of an impact on either people's reactions, or responses, or the government's? So going back, you know, winter, spring 2020.
Right. Well, thank you, Michael. Well, early on, as you said, spring of 2020, Bulgaria introduced a pretty strict lockdown, and you know, at that point globally we didn't know much about the pandemic in general. So most of the media outlets were actually, you know, reporting what the government was, you know, their guidelines, their tips of how to stay safe, you know, washing hands, following personal hygiene, etc., etc. But I think this was, you know, a phenomenon that we see everywhere. When it started changing was later on in the pandemic, and again, worldwide, and as you quote the World Health Organization, they basically dubbed this phenomenon as the infodemic that was kind of spreading as fast or even faster than the pandemic itself. Social media was flooded with disinformation and conspiracy theories and, sometimes outright lies about the coronavirus. Well, what makes Bulgaria different, though, is that we start noticing that in this climate, mainstream media in the country also gave platform to kind of pseudo-experts. And at that point, scientists, already had learned a lot about the coronavirus, what works, what doesn't in terms of measures. But yeah, unfortunately, we saw not just social media, but also traditional media, some of the most watched, read, or listened to media outlets inviting experts who were kind of downplaying the seriousness of the disease and kind of giving controversial advice that was contrary to what the back then scientific consensus was. And it's hard to pin down the exact reasons why we are here, and I'll say in a minute what I mean. And it's a mixture of reasons, again, but I think one of the crucial contributing factors to having Bulgaria having the lowest vaccination rate in the European Union, which is currently around 20%. So only 20% of Bulgarians are fully vaccinated. I think the spread of disinformation played a key role.
20%.
Right.
And lowest in the EU.
True.
Wow. Was there a conversation within the media, or when, if there was a conversation within the media about some of the things you just talked about, pseudo-experts, maybe politicians misrepresenting things, did that conversation happen within the media at all?
Well, it's increasingly becoming an issue and, a matter of like self-reflection. Especially, when it comes to the role of media. And I think what should be emphasized in this case is also this kind of twisted idea of what pluralism is. Because some media outlets, presenting this kind of alternative, what they call viewpoints, again, contrary to the scientific consensus and the facts, I would say, by inviting again those people who kind of spread vaccine skepticism these days, and they continue to be, interviewees in studios, in interviews, etc. So I would like to see more, deeper debate on this issue. But I think the fact that, another ranking that we're kind of at the bottom is that Bulgaria, have one of the worst media freedom, again, in the European Union, and also so a lot of the problems plaguing the media landscape is also playing a role here.
It's all sort of connected. Joanna, what about the situation in Poland, going back to the beginning of the pandemic? What did you start seeing? How was the government responding, etc.?
Right. Well, obviously, as in every other country, we could see the signs of disinformation from the very beginning of pandemic in Poland, and I can see many similarities with what Boryana just said. However, what was quite unique, I guess, for Poland was actually the fact that this misinformation, disinformation very often was coming from state officials or public media. We believe generally that this right to information, I think Pavel talked about it yesterday, that this right to be informed and to make like conscious choices based on reliable information is human rights. And I really believe that in pandemic times, in Poland, we could see a very clear violation of this basic human right. And, you know, the Polish government and pro-government media, private media, but also public media, this captured public media, were actually disinforming Polish citizens on daily basis. And what I mean here is a kind of propaganda of success, which is never good in a situation of a kind of danger or threat. So, yeah, so they were like, you know, showing these anti-pandemic decisions or steps of government officials as like super successful and very needed and very right. And if you watched only Polish state television news over this whole year, actually 2020, you would have no idea that Poland was actually not doing well at all. There is this Bloomberg's COVID resilience ranking, and Poland has fallen to the 50th position out of 53 countries. So we're really not doing very well. But public television and radio and pro-government newspapers and portals were simply spreading this very sophisticated propaganda of success, which was very, very harming and damaging the society. I remember when our Prime Minister said a year ago, I think it was June, that the coronavirus is retreating and there is no more reason to be afraid. And it was just the beginning of summer, and people heard it and said, yes, fine, we can go on holidays, and they did it. And then the next wave came and we're like, okay, like what happened? Why did you say that? I mean, it was clearly disinformating our community. So what was actually interesting was the fact that it was us, independent media, they were labeled as disinformating agents. We were accused of spreading disinformation because what we were doing was simply reporting on what was happening in government circles, mostly in the Ministry of Health. We discovered, I mean, we investigated and then discovered few, well, scams, I would say, which were very much related to a pandemic situation. You know, my newspaper, Gazeta Wyborcza, reported, for example, that the health ministry spent over €1 million on face masks that were later found not to meet safety standards. And what was interesting in this case, it was that the contract originated from our Ministry of Health ski instructor, which was like, wow. There was another.
Maybe they were ski masks then. Right?
Well, even they were, you know, ski masks. I think they would be like safer than whatever was like kind of delivered to us, because like was completely useless. There was another scam that some colleagues from other media actually discovered, and it was about buying by Ministry of Health over 1,000 ventilators, so something like, you know, life supporting, very needed in the times of pandemic. We paid over €40 million for that, and we learned that actually it was bought from a company owned by a gun dealer. And actually, not a single device was delivered to Poland. And the producers of ventilators stated that like nobody ever contacted them about it. So we did all these investigations and then like reporting it, like alongside, you know, the chaos in the ministry, chaos also in providing information, chaos in statistics, which was like great. I mean, great in terms of like grave. This, you know, indolence, manipulating facts, manipulating data, but we were told that we are this disinformating agent. And of course, you know, we paid heavy toll for doing our job.
Well, did the government actually take steps against you?
Oh, yes, they did. I mean, on the one hand, you know, When I talked with my colleagues from other newspapers around Europe, they told me often about, different measures or steps their governments wanted to take or took actually to make the situation of media better. For example, these paid state ads campaigns, about pandemic, or some tax regulations that would ease the situation of media in the times of pandemic. The different types of measures. And what was interesting in Poland is that indeed we had this public information campaigns ordered by our government. However, not all media were actually invited to take part in it. So pro-government media were actually given advertising budgets from the government to publish information, for example, about pandemic, about restrictions. These were like basic information that should be delivered to every Polish citizen. And we, as Gazeta Wyborcza and also some other independent outlets in Poland, we were simply not invited to take part of it. So we were not given money to publish the ads. However, well, we did publish this information kind of for free because we wanted our readers not to be discriminated against. So it was, well, for us, it was like the basic thing that every newspaper should do, just to keep its readers informed. But yes, and it happened a few times. So basically, pro-government media just made deals of their life, publishing and taking these advertising budgets and publishing the ads. And well, we were left with nothing. But it's fine. The other thing was.
So these were paid advertisements. The government was paying.
Yeah.
Select media.
Of course, but not us, right? Well, this is like this is like Polish reality. I can talk about it with like smile on my face because it's like like daily bread right now. So the other thing was this idea of introducing a new advertising tax, which was like aimed at news publishers. And the revenue, like money from this tax, was to be like funneled to health sector, which was hit gravely by the pandemic, obviously. But what it meant actually for smaller news outlets and also independent news outlets would be that they might have been actually financially damaged because of it. And of course, this was not the case for pro-government media, because as I just told you, they were given a kind of financial aid, like in form of advertisements, these campaigns from the government. So actually, this tax would have been very painful for independent media and for smaller media. And what was amazing, actually, was what happened then. Because we could see like a kind of wave of solidarity among independent news outlets. And we together decided that on one day, we will show Polish citizens what it would mean not to have independent media in Poland. And we had a blackout. Every newspaper, independent newspaper in Poland, published like a black first page of their newspapers. And the landing pages of these independent news portals were also blackouts. So they were like no news for one day. And I think it made an impact because the tax wasn't introduced. Brilliant.
Wow. That's amazing. That's quite symbolic. Anna, I want to ask about Ukraine. Were you seeing some of the similar things there in terms of the government, pro-government media, but also just the impact of social media spreading some of this disinformation or misinformation?
I'm actually listening to my colleagues, and I thought that there's a worse situation in Ukraine, but when I'm listening to them, I see it's a lot of the same things, even worse things. But when we are talking about disinformation, I think that we should look at numbers. Yeah, now in Ukraine, it's only 13% of fully vaccinated people. So yeah, 13, yes, by yesterday data. So I mean, these numbers can show, I think, that part of these numbers is result of disinformation, result of conspiracy theories in social networks, because people in Ukraine mostly don't trust government, and if vaccination is campaign made by government, we will not do this. There are a lot of reasons why people don't do this. Like, I'm just giving a small example. Now we have a new wave of pandemic and new restriction, and few days ago it was announced that only school which have 70% of vaccinated teachers will be open. If it less, they will be closed. So yesterday I saw screenshots from teachers' chats how to buy certificate about vaccination. So I think you understand how it works. If teachers who teach kids want to buy certificate about vaccination, so because they don't want to be vaccinated, but they don't want to lose the work, and they just want to buy this, and I know that it works. It works through with the medical, with doctors, all the stuff. So I mean, now I'm talking about some results of disinformation. But if we talk about beginning, how it was, trying to remember how it was in the beginning of pandemic, when pandemic started in Ukraine, around the world. I remember that, of course, Ukrainian government was confused. People didn't know what to do, and since our president and our government is former showmen, you know, that our president, he was comedian. He had like TV show, and they didn't know what to do when pandemic started, and they just decided to look good, to do something for Instagram pictures, so, you know, of course, it was important for them to look good for the world. And in the beginning, we as journalists, as watchdogs, we started to check every information they provided, they gave us, now to figure out if government did good work, if they spent public money in good way. So every day we checked all information, and of course we found a lot of misinformation, we found a lot of lie, and one of them, it was about testing, amount of testing, because Ukrainian government wanted to look good in front of world, that we have a lot of testing and we have small amount of cases. But when we start to check how many tests could laboratories do around Ukraine, we figure out that it's not possible, the numbers they give us. So they just created numbers of testing because no one could check, and I think that it was partly like Soviet planning, that this city should do this number, this city should do this number, just for having good numbers in front of the world. So, and then we checked, we published our stories, we published that laboratories couldn't do that. They just, there is some process of doing this testing, and it's not possible to have 100 per day because they have power only for doing like 20 per day. So we published stories like this, that it was lie about numbers of testing, and another Instagram stories that, of course, we figure out that in Ukraine, government figure out that we didn't have enough face masks, enough equipment, ventilators, and when Ukraine started to buy outside of Ukraine all the things needed for fighting this pandemic, we figure out that all other countries already did that few weeks ago, so we have nothing to buy. And in the end, in a couple of weeks, a big plane with masks, ventilators boarded in Ukraine, landed in Ukraine, and president, prime minister went to meet this plane to take pictures, all this stuff. But the biggest problem was no one knew what's there. I mean, how many staff there, how many face masks, how many ventilators, how much it costs. And when we start to figure out, we got information from our sources. Everyone was really scary to share what exactly is there. So we use it, it's something really useful and important, but we didn't know for what money, who spends this money. Maybe it's businessmen, and we figure out that it's some businessmen who used government plane for putting some goods, their goods, to that plane too. Yes, and it was kind of secret what exactly is there. And then when we found out what was there and how they split there, we also found out that part of rapid tests government sent to special government medical center only for them. And they marked this like for parliament members, for government members. We got this from our sources. Of course, they never admitted that, but they, so good pictures for Instagram, and in the same moment, they just did something for themselves. So, I mean, when we're talking about first months, first weeks, our government was confused, and we found a lot of things like our colleagues around the world found, and we published that, and sometimes, of course, our government and people from government were not happy with it.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you, we heard about Poland where there really was a tax on the independent media for trying to do their job. Did you experience that at all in Ukraine?
Not actually. I can't say that it was something like that. Sometimes people from Ministry of Health, they say like it was some announcement like you're not professional, you don't understand how it works, like, it was like comments, like if you don't figure out, don't publish anything. But mostly it was comments or announcement or something. I can't say that they tried to push us or to press us or to, no, we didn't have that.
So I want to ask you about social media companies. There's been a huge debate in the US about the role of social media companies in transmitting, circulating misinformation, disinformation. There's been efforts by social media to contain some of that, and then there's a counter argument that it's censorship. I know that in other areas, social media companies in other countries, in other languages, are not often as aggressive in monitoring what's going on. And I don't know if that's the case with COVID in your countries, but I am curious, you've touched on the role of social media, but talk to me a little bit more about any kind of accountability, any kind of conversation about their responsibility in these areas. Joanna?
Right. I don't know if I can say anything like exceptional or different from what was actually happening across Europe. Obviously, we did observe a wave of fake news and disinformation targeting these most sensitive topics, such as, cure for COVID. Conspiracy theories about who's actually benefiting from the pandemic. And then when the vaccination action started, this whole debate, I don't know if I can even call it a debate, this whole craze around whether to be vaccinated or not, and if you vaccinate, what's happening to you. The policies of social media platforms are quite generic, I would say. I mean, there were no specific activities taken by Facebook in Poland. Apart from these, they were introduced mostly like around the globe. So we were informed, and we could see actually, the fact checkers working, special, captions or labeling information in a way Facebook declared to do, and it was actually kind of working. However, we have to remember that this type of disinformation firstly, like the source of disinformation is usually like kind of outside. It's only like republished on Facebook. This is one thing. And the real discussion very often takes place in Facebook groups. Not really like in comments, because you can see, of course, you can see, you know, the activity of, you know, trolls and so on and so forth. But these groups are the places where people are sharing their, I don't know, conspiracy theories, or, you know, their thoughts about harm of vaccinations, and they are like reinforcing, you know, their beliefs there, right? Because they feel that they are creating a community, and this is quite dangerous. And as far as I know, although I'm not a specialist in social media platforms, but as far as I know, nothing has been done when it comes to, you know, this type of communication.
Right. Anna or Boryana, any relevant experiences in Bulgaria or Ukraine in terms of social media and holding social media companies accountable for these kinds of things, misinformation?
Just maybe briefly, as you mentioned, Michael, in local languages, it's very different when disinformation is being spread in English, because again, Facebook, Twitter on the global scale, you know, marked some of those video that was spreading conspiracy theory as, you know, harmful, as disinformation, etc. In Bulgarian, I mean, I can talk probably about towards the end of last year, some of these, like the pandemic video, for example, because it was with Bulgarian subtitles, it could still be found in various, you know, platforms. And again, because I guess it's harder to, you know, monitor the spread of conspiracy theories when it's kind of a different language.
Actually, we in Ukraine a little bit lucky because we have Russian propaganda, and for years of war with Russia, there are few pretty strong, good quality organization which work with disinformation. They just find good examples of Russian propaganda or other disinformation, and they are pretty powerful, and other media republish that. So thanks, Russians. We have practicing for many years to fight with disinformation, and because of it, social networks like Facebook, Facebook is very popular in Ukraine. Not only like friends platform, it's platform for political things. So so thanks. Thanks to this, we have some, we know how to fight with propaganda, but there is also, I think it's Ukrainian thing, Belarusian thing, and Russian thing. We have anonymous Telegram channels. If you know what is it, you know, Telegram, yeah. And Telegram channels, it's usually place for publishing all these conspiracy theories, and they are creating and disappearing, and that Telegram channels were uncontrolling. It was hard to find who was there, and they were pretty powerful and made some influence. For example, I think that in every country you had something like this when Ukrainians were evacuated from China and went in the beginning of pandemic. Plane with Ukrainians came to Ukraine, and they needed to be in observation for 2 weeks. It was beginning March, 1.5 years ago, and the government decided that people, Ukrainians from China, will go to small city to hospital, to being 2 weeks in observation. It's very, very small city. In one moment, some Telegram groups were created, and people from that city start to fight with that people. And it was like a lot of hate there, that they shouldn't be in our city. And when buses with these people came, people start to crash buses. After that, some Ukrainian media, good media, they published investigation about these Telegram groups, about trolls who made this. So all this hate which was made in that small city was made by Telegrams. And the journalists find out that it was people from Russia who created all the stuff. And by the way, about that story, HBO, I think they published the movie about that. Yes, I know that they did. They went to Ukraine for doing this, for doing the movie. Yes, it was really a shame how it was Ukrainians who fight with Ukrainians. And we know that all the things were provoked by Telegram channels, Viber groups, all the stuff. People start to fight with Ukrainians, you know. So when we're talking about disinformation, we have very different things, like good organization which knows how to fight with disinformation, Russian disinformation propaganda and stuff like this, you know, like when some social media can create very big hate, Ukrainians against Ukrainians.
Wow, that's real. You know, the real world, this stuff becomes very real and not just in people's minds. I want to get to questions in a second. We did have a question coming in from online, which is relevant to what you were just talking about, Anna. And that is, there's been a boom in fact-checking initiatives in response prior to the pandemic, but since then. To what extent do you think those efforts and investments have been effective? And are there other approaches that could have had better potential?
I do value a lot fact-checking initiatives. However, whenever I'm asked about what is actually working best when it comes to, you know, verifying news and, you know, like teaching people this kind of, you know, this way of thinking that can differentiate between true information from false information, my answer is always the same. What, in my opinion, works best is providing people with quality news and making this news as available as possible. So I think what is actually working the best is making sure that news landscape in a given country is pluralistic, is open, is big, and is of high quality, so that people know that there are places where they can go and read information that will be checked and is reliable. I think this is very important, and we need fact checkers, but we mustn't forget about the fact that actually the backbone is you know, quality news outlets.
Boryana, what about that question in terms of Bulgaria?
Right. I tend to agree with Joanna. You know, we actually developed a section called the Chronicles of the Infodemic, where we kind of debunk, you know, these major conspiracy theories and rumors related to the pandemic. And the Association of European Journalists also started a fact-checking unit, which is the first kind of such endeavor of sorts in the country. And many of the news, of course, they were checking were related, again, to the coronavirus. But in general, I agree with Joanna that, you know, it's really up to providing quality information. So as we discussed earlier, people can make informed decision. I mean, you as a publication, as a reporter, if you don't follow like the basic principles of like fact-checking, but like verifying your information, not just debunking after the fact, but like, when, the government Ukraine or in Poland or in Bulgaria, whatever, they provide some stats that maybe they're not correct or etc. Or again, just doing your homework and Googling the expert that you're about to invite in your TV show or whatever, or just to be interviewed, to check their backgrounds, because as I mentioned earlier, some of those people who are still, again, being interviewed by media, they were proved to be providing not factual information, and some journalists still continue to go to them. They're kind of the go-to person. Yeah, it's really also for me providing context, because again, you can never be sure what whoever you invited will be telling you, but if you know that they're lying to your audience, you should be the one, saying this and confronting them with the facts. So I think it's a mixture of things. Fact-checking is definitely necessary, but also like providing context, explaining the background, especially in a situation where it's very dynamic and is changing very quickly. And just to go back to the beginning of the pandemic, actually, one of the silver linings or the positive aspects was that a lot of reputable publication in Bulgaria saw an increase in their viewership or readership, because people were really hungry for reliable information at a time of a global public health crisis. So they weren't going at that point to tabloid style media or controlled media who were like again spreading disinformation. They wanted to hear about the facts. And I think this highlights the need of really fact-based quality reporting.
Well said. Are there any questions from the audience here about media's handling of the pandemic disinformation? Well, if you have any questions, raise your hand. Joanna, you talked a little bit about, I'm curious to all of you what concerns you have about other steps your governments might take in terms of limiting the ability of the media to report in these kinds of situations. And Joanna, we were talking a little bit about your concerns, say, in the border with Belarus, and talk to me about what those concerns are moving forward.
One of the greatest concerns in the past 18 months, the pandemic in Poland was this threat of introducing the state of emergency in our country. And despite there were all arguments for doing that, our government did not decide to do that, even though the situation with COVID was really, really difficult and grave. There was no decision to introduce the state of emergency, mostly because in 2020 we had the presidential elections. 2020, yeah, and we had this need of, not we, the government ruling party had this need of actually having these presidential elections, and with the state of emergency it would have been simply impossible. So they didn't introduce the state of emergency, although we were kind of completely prepared for that. We made all contingency plans, how to publish media in the state of emergency, because what basically the state of emergency does is limiting the operations of civil society organizations and the media. So we had all this plan, how to function in such a situation. Luckily, back then, a year ago, there was no need of introducing our contingency plans. However, this year, a few weeks ago, we were faced with a difficult situation on our border with Belarus. which faced the influx of refugees from different places of the world, like Middle East, but also Africa, who were trying to cross our border, meaning also the border of the European Union, from Belarusian side. And obviously, we as media, we were very much interested in reporting on this situation, and there were many reporters and journalists at the border asking relevant questions. You know, what is happening there? Why these people are being deprived of their basic rights, meaning the right of applying for the status of a refugee. Why our border control service is actually doing something that is practically illegal, meaning doing pushbacks. So like pushing these people back to Belarus, and Belarusian service, they were like pushing them back to Poland, and it was like never ending. And it has been like this for few weeks now. And when the situation started being like really uncomfortable for the government, they decided that they will use this situation to introduce the state of emergency, stating that this is actually a threat to Polish democracy, because they see the situation as a hybrid war from Belarusian side. So they introduced the state of emergency at the borderland with Belarus, which means that media is not allowed to be there anymore, as well as civic society organizations. And there are like dozens, if probably not hundreds, we don't know actually how many refugees are there at the border. We don't know because media is not allowed to be there. And what we decided to do, we, meaning independent media in Poland, like 40 of us, over 40 right now, signed a declaration stating that, well, we will not abide to this state of emergency laws. And we will just continue doing what we are supposed to do, being in places and in time where and when there is a possible violation of human rights. And we really don't, we don't accept, this argument that it might be, difficult military situation. Journalists should be there when the situation is difficult, also from military point of view. So we really believe that our presence there is of utmost importance, and we decided to send our journalists at the border, even risking that they will be fined or imprisoned. And it was decided by 40 independent outlets in Poland who are sending their journalists at the border, despite the fact that it is illegal at the moment.
And what's happened?
Well, there were two journalists from Onet portal actually detained, and they were fined. What is interesting is that we actually we established a kind of informal fund for legal aid for these journalists. Of course, it's not so acute when you work for a big company, but for smaller, independent journalists, but also civil society servants or activists, we just wanted them to feel kind of, safe in this situation. I cannot tell you what is happening exactly, because many of our journalists are there like undercover. So like, dressed as pilgrims, for example, because like pilgrimage is still allowed. So, right. So I cannot tell you the details, but indeed we are there, and it's very important to report about it, because there have been casualties there, like 5 refugees already been found dead, and the situation will be deteriorating. So. Yes, I'm very brave. I'm very, very proud of my brave colleagues.
Anna, I want to ask you, if we're heading into winter, if we get another, I hope we don't, a big upsurge or a new variant or whatever, what are your biggest concerns in terms of media situation in Ukraine? Are all these lessons going to be learned and people will respond differently, or what are your biggest concerns?
Actually, I think the biggest concerns about permission for journalists, permission to access to press conferences, I mean, when we're talking about COVID, sometimes politicians use this like for, oh no, only 10 people can be there, and it's not you because your media is small, and we will not have access to talk to politicians. 1 year ago, we had situation when Ukrainian parliament sent a letter to my agency that your accreditation of all of your journalists were cancelled because you're not covering the work of parliament like often enough or good enough. And it was very big scandal because we cover pretty good work of parliament, especially some members of parliament who has like a lot of money in their declaration. I mean, we just cover parliament not in that way parliament wants us to cover. So they used situation. Then I talked to people, they said, we just wanted to delete media and journalists because of COVID, you know, that's excuse. Just to say that we want limited amount of journalists here or there or there. In the end, we have accreditation, of course, because it's very easy to understand that every week we report something about parliament. We just come there to catch people to answer our questions because we usually do investigations. So mostly I think it's about access and permission, and they will to press conference of president or big politicians, they can say, we have not enough space, we have only like few places, and you are not national big media, you are not national big channel, so you can just sit and listen on TV how it is. So mostly it's about that. I understand partly, but in the same moment we see that independent media will not be, because they are mostly small, will not be allowed to talk to politicians and ask direct questions. I think this is the biggest my concern about that.
We have a question from one of our online viewers, and I'm going to sort of try to paraphrase it, but I think what they're getting at is, you know, the work of investigative reporters is to raise questions, be skeptical towards some of the things the government tells us. And the viewer is asking, is there a concern, or have you seen that kind of skepticism reinforces or could reinforce a skepticism towards what the government is saying about the pandemic or the government response? Not that that is at all your intent, but that's what the person is interested in. Is there a risk? Is there a danger, or is that something you're conscious of? Boryana. In other words, if we can't believe what the government's telling us about the import of PPEs, for example, why should we believe what they're telling us about the pandemic?
Right. Well, I think we should go back to the basics, and I truly believe that one of the jobs of, like, the job of a journalist is to raise questions, as you said. So, well, it's a complicated issues, and it comes to the role of journalists and the media in general. But as my colleagues here highlighted, if we know that in Poland or the Ukraine, and for that matter, there were some like shady deals that Bulgarian government in the past did. I mean, there was this, and it was actually the work of investigative journalists who revealed that you know, a plane supposedly bringing, you know, masks and PPE is actually full of dates. And I mean, yeah, like the fruit, the right date. So this is a question of a bigger debate, but we do need journalists to ask these questions, even if that might deepen the distrust of people in a government. And I'm aware that this is a very sensitive question, again, at a time of a public health crisis. But we cannot just like turn a blind eye when there is like abuse of power or like taxpayer money being channeled to like shady deals, even when it comes to health issues, at least that's my opinion.
Anna or Joanna, any final thoughts?
I think actually it's mostly a philosophical question, because many people in Ukraine want to simplify things. We trust government or we don't trust government, yes? But word is not so simple. In some questions we trust government, in some questions no. And our work, I know some people ask us, why you never write something good about government? I told them, guys, we are, like doctor. When you come to doctor, doctor will never tell you that you are good. Or almost never. It's our work. We do this. We decided to do this. It's our mission and our responsibility. Of course, we find bad things, but it doesn't mean that everything is bad. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't trust government. In some understanding, yes, and very important to have critical mind. To understand, yes, it's true, it's not true. Of course, I mean, I told you the numbers, 13% fully vaccinated people. And it's because Ukrainians want to have simple answers for complicated questions. We don't trust government, so we will not vaccinate it. So we will just buy certificates, yes. So it's a philosophical question. It's about critical mind, it's about not like simple things around the world. So
Anna and Boryana actually have said everything I wanted to conclude with, and well, obviously this is not our role to make the institutions stronger. Our role is to make the institutions accountable. So, and let's keep to our role. Thank you.
A good place to stop on. Thank you, Boryana, Joanna, Anna. Thanks for doing this.